In this timeline, Percy Jackson is not the son of Poseidon. He is the son of Zeus, and the gods are watching him closer than ever. Thunder rolled over camp as Percy faced his first true challenge. Clarice LaRue was sprinting at him with full force and aiming for his head. As Percy became bruised, battered, and cornered, he didn't have the same inclination to go towards the sea. Instead, the clouds gathered and the sky darkened. Finally, when Clarice was about to strike her final blow, lightning struck on Percy's sword. As Percy's eyes turned a light ozone blue, he seemed to get 10 years of experience in an instant and beat back Clarice and her allies. The rest of Camp Half-Blood was now watching as the war games were over, and as Clarice was offering her surrender, something weird happened that truly no one expected. "You have been claimed by Zeus," Chiron announced. "Lightning bringer, storm maker, king of the gods. Hail, Perseus Jackson, son of Zeus." Before he could fully process what was happening, Percy looked around to see everyone kneeling in respect. Before he knew it, his things were moved for him to Cabin 1, the cabin of Zeus. He didn't feel all that different, yet he was treated as such. Only later would he learn when Luke told him that there had been another child of Zeus not too long ago, called Thalia, but she tragically died protecting the camp. And so everyone's still kinda hung up on that. Soon after, he was called to the big house to speak with Chiron. He told him that it's not a coincidence he was claimed by Zeus now. The Master Bolt, his signature weapon, is gone, and he suspects Poseidon or Hades. Zeus has chosen Percy as his own champion to retrieve his bolt. This was all a bit much. Percy didn't even know his father. Why would he now risk his life for him? But understanding that it wouldn't just affect his father, but rather the entire camp, and possibly the entire world if war broke out, he decided to help anyways, but not for Zeus, for his mom and his newfound friends. Allowed to take 2 companions on his quest, he decided Grover, naturally, as he's the one that brought him to camp and his only real friend, as well as Annabeth Chase. She did trick him in the war games, but she seemed very smart, not to mention she's the daughter of Athena, and had been training for this for many years. And so, given the same prophecy as in canon, they go off on the quest to retrieve the Master Bolt of Zeus. On their journey west, Percy finally gets some time to think for himself. His father, supposedly, is the strongest god of them all, king of the gods, yet he doesn't feel like it. He's a kid with ADHD and dyslexia. He's shy, especially around girls, doesn't have any practice in combat, and has no idea how to find this extremely powerful artifact that his father wants. Annabeth manages to calm him down a bit as she has a lot more experience in these kind of things, not quest per se, but she's a lot more knowledgeable, and tells him that he doesn't have to do this alone. He has teammates for a reason. Though when she says all that, he also feels weird. Annabeth has been acting really different since he got claimed. He doesn't want to ask her directly, so he asks Grover, and he mentions, sadly, that she was very close to Thalia, and might view Percy as Thalia's replacement, but he shouldn't really think too much of it. It'll definitely wear off after a while. Percy thinks it's kinda weird, but it is what it is. Tired from their journey, they end up at Auntie M's, where a nice old woman invites them for some food and drinks. As it turns out though, this is Medusa in disguise, and quickly a battle erupts. They run through a maze of statues, but finally, with Grover and Annabeth's help, he's able to successfully use the sword Chiron gave him called Riptide. They then retrieve Medusa's head and continue on their journey. With some money for Medusa's that they took, they take a train west, and immediately fall asleep. Percy, however, does not get to relax. He has a nightmare. He sees a girl in punk clothes who asks him, "What are you gonna do?" Then everything blurs, and the last thing he hears before total darkness is a maniacal laugh coming from under the earth, as well as the faint whispering in the girl's voice of "brother." He's jolted awake by Annabeth telling him that they arrived at the St. Louis Arch. He is a bit confused as that wasn't their goal, but Annabeth is really excited as she loves architecture. And so, even though she's not the quest leader, she decides for everyone that they're gonna do a small field trip. She's a bit more cautious than canon though, as this is a son of Zeus, not Poseidon. Sure, they're both respected, but a son of Zeus, the king of the gods, is a whole nother level. Not to mention it brings up all the guilt she had for Thalia's death. But they still go. Percy's a nice guy, and he doesn't really seem to have that Zeus authority that you would expect. And he doesn't quite seem as short-tempered as Thalia. In fact, it's really weird actually. A son of Zeus is supposed to be a natural-born leader, But Percy is really relying on his teammates. Without Grover and Annabeth, he wouldn't even have a way to go west. But it makes her happy, being relied upon. It's what she trained for all these years. Percy, though, isn't giving it as much thought as her. He's just enjoying the nice view from the top. Though, before he knows it, he's faced with Echidna and the Chimera. Annabeth and Grover already went back down, so Percy's alone. As he's being pushed back, fearing Echidna, and being stung by the Chimera, he thinks it's all over. But then he clenches his fist. He decides when it's over. His mom needs rescuing. When they went to the underworld, Percy would negotiate for his mom's life. He needed to see things through. With these pent-up emotions being brought back, the weather changed abruptly. Clouds gathered and lightning could be heard. Finally, lightning struck the arch and the roof disappeared. Percy's eyes once more turned a light blue, and as the air smelled of ozone, his sword started crackling. Whilst the Chimera was now acting unsure, he struck, and his sword acted kind of like a taser. The Chimera started spazzing, like hit with a taser, and finally, as it disintegrated, smoke came out. Perseus had defeated this monster all on his own. Echidna was furious that one of her babies was hurt, and so she sent Percy flying through the opening in the roof that he created. Luckily though, before he was able to hit the ground and splatter, a cloud was nice enough to stop his fall, and he then slowly glided towards the ground. Percy thanked what appeared to be some sort of cloud spirit and went on to Annabeth and Grover. Percy tells him what happened, and Grover is very proud of his friend for having won the battle, but Annabeth sees more and more of Thalia in Percy, the bravery and the ultimate power of Zeus. She doesn't yet know what to think, so she tells everyone to go on their quest. They have limited time after all. As they continue to make their way west to the entrance of the underworld, they briefly stop to rest and eat, but then a confident-looking biker enters the restaurant, and as it happens, sits right next to them. As he takes off his sunglasses, there's fire in his eyes. Before Percy manages to yell at him to find his own table, Annabeth makes him sit back down. "Hello, Lord Ares," she says. "Ares?" "Yeah, brother. You got a problem with that?" "Brother?" he asks. "Your father is Zeus, isn't he?" Ares responds. "Well then, that makes me your older brother. And let me give you a word of caution. Don't disrespect the gods. There are those who aren't as well-tempered as me. Though I will say you've made it farther than that sister of yours, Thalia. So I guess you do show some promise. Either way, I know you're on a quest, so I'll make it short. I have a mission for you, and in return, I'll help you get to Hades." Percy, again, was about to be rash and decline, but Annabeth whispered in his ear, kind of expecting his answer. She told him they can't well refuse the orders of a god, definitely not Ares, and so they have to help him retrieve his stupid shield when he was out on a date with Aphrodite. Ares mentioned this is a quest for two people, and since they need someone to take care of their belongings whilst they're gone, Percy and Annabeth go on the mini-quest whilst Grover stays behind, and gets some well-needed rest. Whilst walking through this abandoned amusement park looking for Ares' shield, Annabeth vents her frustration, partly to herself and partly to Percy. She's mad at Ares for how he talked about Thalia, and Percy reminds her so much of Thalia, but she's worried Percy will suffer a similar fate as she did. Percy tries to calm her down, saying that he'll be very careful, and that he is training, but it's not enough. She tells him that being a child of Zeus is dangerous. Thalia was powerful, and it's not like she did anything wrong, and yet she couldn't save herself. Now Percy himself is unsure. Does he either lie to his questmate, saying that everything will be alright, or does he tell the truth of how frustrated and confused he is? He decides to go for the latter. Maybe it wasn't the right choice, but it's what he needed. Hell, he needed to vent sometimes too. He starts getting louder about how annoyed he is at the gods, at his father, about how unfair the world is. As his anger swells, the clouds gather. The sun is now fully blocked out, and as he screams at the sky in frustration, thunder rolls. Annabeth had never seen Thalia this way. She was much more stoic, much more calm and composed. But this was a nice change of pace. It was nice seeing someone else have the same frustration that she did. She actually felt heard and understood. But deciding that it was enough cursing at the gods for one day, they continued on their quest. Even though really it should have done the opposite, Annabeth actually became more confident after hearing Percy vent. Yeah, he was the son of Zeus, but he was also just a normal kid. One who a couple weeks ago didn't even know about his heritage. And from that point on, both would agree that they really became friends. Both still frustrated with Ares, tried to grab the shield and leave as quickly as possible without setting off any of Hephaestus' traps that they kinda figured would be there. Otherwise, there's no reason Ares wouldn't go himself. But when they do accidentally set off a trap, that creates an iris message directly to Olympus so that all the gods can laugh at Percy and Annabeth for having failed. Percy immediately swishes his sword through the mist, and so it dissipates without ever creating a clear connection. He was sick and tired of gods playing their games with mortals as if it doesn't matter. They're on a quest to help Zeus and the gods, and yet they don't even not help, they actively make their quest harder. But Percy, kinda worried that some god is reading his mind and will smite him any second, stops thinking about that kind of thing. When they bring back the shield to its rightful owner, Ares tells them that a zoo transport will bring them to Vegas, and that they should be able to find their way from there. They accept the reward without saying anything as they don't want to be bogged down more, and go on their way. At Vegas, they leave the transport and free the animals whilst they're at it, and sought out a place for the night, as they were near the underworld entrance now, and they needed to be prepared once they do go in. They stumble their way into the Lotus Hotel and Casino, where they're treated abnormally nice for customers who aren't willing to pay. After they leave their stuff in the hotel part, they go to the casino, but they can't really go into the casino as they're underage, so they go to the kids section, which is surprisingly large. They have everything from a bouncy castle to gaming sections, and regular arcade games. They kinda lose track of time, and before they know it, Annabeth and Percy are playing a competitive strategy game against each other. Naturally, Percy starts losing. As he gets more and more frustrated, sparks start arching from his controller to the console, and finally it breaks down before the game is finished. He then claims that Annabeth never truly won the game because it didn't actually end. Annabeth then calls him Sparkboy and tells him that if she ever gets a phone, she'll call him to recharge it. Weird enough, after the game they don't feel tired at all, and continue playing a different game, and then another one, and then another one. Even though they felt so tired before they got to the casino, now they don't at all. Grover is busy playing a game where he is a deer hunting humans, whilst Annabeth is busy playing some architecture game where she can redesign London from the ground up. During this fun night, they're all given lotus flowers by staff to eat. It's complimentary, so why wouldn't they? And they taste really good. But as Percy is now exploring the place alone, he feels really weird. As he's approaching another guy his age at a pinball machine, he hears a girl yelling, "Nico!" but it's quickly faded out by loud music and talking. He starts talking to this guy and asks him what kind of things he likes, but it's weird. Even though they seem a similar age, the things he likes are like 30 years old. No new movies or games. So, having this weird suspicion, he asks him what year it is. Partly as a game, but also partly to see what the hell is up with this place. The guy answers 1983, but that can't be, it's the 21st century. But he's not lying, he really thinks it's 1983. Percy goes back to where Annabeth was, and on the way he's offered lotus flower 5 different times. And even though they taste good, this time he refuses. He feels a bit off about this place. Everything feels right, but too right. Everyone on the slot machines is always winning. There's infinite food and drinks. New games are being built up every hour. And they haven't yet asked who they are or how they're gonna pay. On his way to her, he's almost forgetting what Annabeth even looks like. And that really scares him. They haven't known each other for that long, but she's important to him, and has been crucial in helping him stay alive. So, as anyone would, he starts yelling her name in every direction. After a minute or so, her head pops up and asks him what the hell he thinks he's doing. He tells her they need to leave, but she doesn't want to. They've only been here for like half an hour, and then he responds that it's been multiple hours. They can't find any clock around them, and they left all their belongings in the hotel room. Annabeth now understands what Percy means. This is kind of weird. They start asking some people and no one knows what time or honestly even what day it is. Some guys are saying it's the 90s, one girl even said it's 1923, and they're all dead serious. That's when they now start really panicking, and they immediately try to find Grover, which they do, even though he doesn't want to stop. Annabeth tells Percy to fry his game, and so he does. He's not great with his powers, but he is at least starting to learn how to use his electricity/lightning powers a bit, though not really combat worthy yet. On their way up to the hotel room when they're trying to leave, more and more of the staff are trying to convince them to stay, telling them, "Oh, you'll get a free night extra," or that there's extra new games being installed right now that they can play, as well as even an infinite credit card that they can use to spend on anything in the casino. Annabeth quickly grabs the credit card, but then tells them that sadly they can't stay and that they have to go somewhere. They manage to, at last, get out of the hotel and casino, but when they look outside, it's weird. It's not evening as when they arrived, and matter of fact, it's not even the same day. They left 5 days after they arrived, and so immediately called a taxi and booked it. They used their unlimited credit card that they got from the casino and tried paying on the taxi, and it actually worked. It just showed an infinity symbol on the credit card machine. So, not worried about the cash, they told him that if the taxi driver goes as fast as possible to Hollywood, they'll just give him the card, no questions asked. But maybe they shouldn't have said that, as he never once goes below the speed limit. They catch up with each other, making sure everyone's fine, though now realize that they don't have much time to the summer solstice. As they rush to the underworld entrance, they see Charon, the one who drives people across the river Styx, and eventually bribe him with the last drachmas they took from Medusa's. With that, they finally managed to enter the underworld. They got past Cerberus when Annabeth tricked him using a rubber ball and made their way to Hades' palace. But before they did, they encountered a huge pit into nothingness. They made sure to go around it, but slowly but surely Grover was being dragged towards it. He was wearing winged shoes given by their friend Luke, son of Hermes. But he seemed to be flying even though he didn't activate them, and slowly and surely being dragged towards the pit. Before he could act, Percy started hearing a voice again from his dreams.
Perseus, join me and defeat your father.
It was the same voice that rung out from the ground before in his dream.
It is the natural way.
Annabeth yelled that this is a titan and that he shouldn't trust it.
Clever demigod. Perseus, overthrow your father as he did Kronos, and Kronos his own father. Do as you were fated to.
No! Percy yelled and shot electricity at Grover's boots, frying the wings and bringing him back to the ground, safely. The boys from the pit disappeared and they quickly ran away from that weird place and towards Hades' planet. They were on a tight schedule. Maybe it was his thoughts weighing him down, but he felt slower, more heavy than before. Finally, they arrived at Hades' place, and Hades got livid. He yelled at Percy, saying no son of Zeus is welcome here. Though he then asked if he had his helmet of darkness. He suspected one of his brothers stole it, but of course they couldn't take it themselves, so maybe their children. Demigods. The natural suspect was Percy, but he said he didn't have it. As Hades was getting ready to feed the trio of demigods to his hellhounds, he told Percy to open his backpack. Surely enough, inside was the lightning bolt, Zeus's master bolt. Percy was shocked it was there, and Hades was saying they were trying to frame him. Then Percy asked where his mother is. Hades told him he will give him his mother back if he gives him the lightning bolt. Percy though was tired of playing games with the gods, so he told him, Mom first, then the bolt. Hades, not one to go back on his word, gave Percy his mom back, alive and healthy, and then demanded the bolt as the hellhounds were nearing. Percy told everyone to grab on though, and what he then did surprised himself. He gripped the master bolt tightly and, for the first time ever, prayed to his father. Electricity started shooting in every direction, and finally, lightning hit them, even though they were underground. Everyone closed their eyes as it was getting too bright, and when they opened them back up, they were standing on the beach of Santa Monica. Before they could really understand what happened, they saw Ares again, this time not looking so happy. You weren't supposed to make it out alive, kid. And finally, they understood. The backpack Ares gave them had the lightning bolt in it, with some sort of magic that only activated once they were in the underworld. They didn't understand why, but Ares was somehow involved in stealing the lightning bolt. Percy, now more confident and protective of his friends and family than ever, told his mom and his friends to stay back. He was gonna fight the war god. Ares, though, told him that it's not really a fair fight, so whoever draws first blood will be declared as the winner. And so they started fighting. Annabeth told Percy that he shouldn't use the Master Bolt in this fight, as if he's not careful, he could blow up the entire eastern seaboard. So she held onto it until their fight was over. She gave him her camp necklace as a show of gratitude and trust in her friend. Even though Percy was okay with the sword, obviously he was no match for Ares, the war god. But as Percy grew more and more angry at how close they were, and that he had saved his mother, and yet this jerk was stopping him from enjoying his wins, once again, cloud gathered and the air smelled of ozone. Percy's eyes went a light blue and his sword started flickering electricity. But this time, instead of just charging at Ares, Suddenly lightning hit him, and then it also hit right behind Ares, and suddenly Percy appeared where the second lightning struck. It was some form of ultra-high-speed travel or teleportation that allowed Percy to ride the lightning as his mode of transportation. Catching Ares by surprise, he swiped at his legs, and it worked. Ares fell to the ground, bleeding golden ichor, and Percy stood victorious, above a god. Ares was now done playing games though, and before using his true form, which would incinerate any mortal who looked at it, he cursed Percy, that when he really needed his sword most, it would fail him. Annabeth screamed for everyone to close their eyes before they were incinerated by Ares' true form. Then Miss Dodds, Percy's old math teacher, who happened to be a Fury, also appeared. She told him that his debt to Hades for taking his mom was paid, as Ares was also involved in taking the Helmet of Darkness which the Furies had retrieved. Suspicion of Percy was cleared, and he was thanked by the Furies in the name of Hades. As Percy finally embraced his mom again, Annabeth reminded him that their quest wasn't done yet. They had to give the lightning bolt back to Zeus, and they only had a few more minutes till the solstice, so they sprinted to the Empire State Building and went to the 600th floor, where Olympus resided. They rushed through the streets to finally find the huge hall containing the 12 Olympian seats and their respective god. Sally had to stay behind as she was fully mortal, but the questers bust into the main hall, seeing Zeus argue with his brother Poseidon. "What?" Zeus yelled before seeing that it was actually his son, with the Master Bolt in hand. "Ah, my son, you have retrieved my bolt. I knew you had it in you. Thank you for completing this quest. Your bravery has been noted." And that was it. Nothing more to say. Poseidon and Zeus both sat down in their chair. Poseidon saying a quick, "I told you I didn't steal it," as Percy recounted how Ares was somehow involved. Percy stared hopefully at his father for him to say something, to talk to him personally, but nothing of the sort. Zeus commanded the demigods to go back to Camp Half-Blood and enjoy their victory. Percy started sparking again, but without saying anything, he turned around and left, slamming the door as best he could, though it was a bit too large for him to do so. Percy, after having some time with his mom, said his goodbyes and returned to Camp Half-Blood for the rest of the summer. The trio were welcomed back as heroes, those who stopped the war between the gods. Only the Ares cabin was a bit miffed, mostly that their father was humiliated by this Percy Jackson, especially Clarice, who didn't like Percy before either. At the end of summer, when it finally got to the decision of whether to stay for the rest of the year, or to go back to the regular mortal life and only come back during the summer, Percy Jackson was thinking it over. He really liked this camp. It was much more fun than having to go from school to school and worrying about math tests and English essays. Annabeth, having gained more confidence on this quest, wanted to go back to try it with her dad. Percy encouraged her to take the risk, and so she did, going back to her parents' house. Percy, meanwhile, did some more training with Luke, and on the very last day where he could decide, Luke seemed a bit different. He seemed annoyed, not happy like everyone else. Percy asked him if he's going to stay year-round or leave until next summer, but Luke told him he's never coming back to this place. He's had enough of the gods, and now it's time for a new age. Percy was really confused, but it almost sounded like that voice from the pit. Not the voice itself, but the words that were coming out of his mouth. The idea of some sort of revolution against the gods. And then it all clicked. It was you. You stole the bolt, Luke. Yes, I did. And it would have worked if you just fell into Tartarus. Why? Why did you do such a thing, Luke? Everyone respects you here. Oh yeah? The gods respect me too? They killed Thalia. They don't even want us. They give us quests to weed us out and don't protect us from the monsters at all. It's time for us to change things, Percy, don't you see? What did they do when your mother was taken by Hades? Nothing. Did Zeus even care when you looked at him? When you did his bidding? Well, your silence is enough of an answer. I know the truth, Percy, whether you want to believe it or not. The next time we meet, we'll be on the battlefield, and it won't be as allies. As he said that and Percy was about to get ready to fight, a scorpion landed on his shoulder. Luke told him that that scorpion, with one sting, will paralyze you and finally kill you. And when Percy looked back where Luke was before, he was gone, and the scorpion stung him. He was brought to the big house by some campers and patched up by Chiron. And finally that cleared his head enough to decide that he was going to go back to his mom. and go back to his weird godly family in the summer. Grover and Annabeth were already gone on their respective missions, Grover trying to find Pan, and Annabeth trying to fit in with normal society. And so the only person he said goodbye to was Chiron and some of the campers. And then, he left. He went back to his mom's place where for some reason his weird stepdad wasn't there anymore. And so he had survived his first summer and a quest as a demigod. Since then, almost a full year has passed and it's soon to be summer again. Percy had a bad last day of school as it turned out that his opponents in dodgeball weren't regular mortal kids but rather Lastrygonian giants. To his rescue though came a kid by the name of Tyson who he'd met a couple months back. He was nice and really tall for his age, but was an orphan. He had nowhere to be, and so it was more of a community project to allow him into school. For some reason though, he wasn't very affected by the flaming chunks of rock called dodgeball, and after a few more shenanigans, including setting the gym on fire, Percy and Tyson made it out of the building, but just to meet Annabeth. For some reason she was waiting outside the school for Percy. She wanted to take Percy and leave Tyson behind, but he argued that Jake couldn't. He was in danger too, as he was attacked by the Lastrygonians too, and Annabeth said that he's a Cyclops, that's why. Percy didn't really understand, but for the first time, when he looked at Tyson's face, it was only one eye, not two, and he'd finally understood why Tyson was so different from every kid. But it also made it kinda weird because Tyson is therefore the son of Poseidon, whilst Percy is the son of Zeus. Two gods which historically didn't get along very well, and especially not their children. But he knew Tyson he wouldn't hurt a fly, and they would have to discuss this some other time. For now they called a ride, and Annabeth had just the thing. They used the magical Grey Sisters taxi to get to camp as fast as possible, only to find that the camp was also being attacked. On the way though, the Grey Sisters let some important information slip that they shouldn't have, and Percy, holding one of their eyes hostage, well, the only eye that is, asked them what it meant, but the only return he got was numbers. Coordinates to be precise. Annabeth, who could immediately visualize where the coordinates were on a world map, said that the coordinates lay somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle. Though, as I just mentioned, the camp was being attacked, so they didn't have much time to ask more questions. They go to help Clarice in her fight against the Colchis Bolts and manage to defeat them, especially with Tyson's help, as he is fire immune. Percy uses his sword Riptide and is able to activate his electricity power, and therefore disable the Colchis Bolt's mechanics, and it kind of poofs away into existence. Clarice and Tyson defeat the other bull, and then they have a long chat about what just happened in the last couple of hours. Tantalus, who's now a replacement for Chiron, tries to kick out Tyson, but Tyson is claimed by Poseidon, so that doesn't really go as planned. Speaking of Chiron, he was sent away from camp and almost banished because he was suspected for having poisoned Thalia's tree. Oh yeah, that's another thing. Luke apparently poisoned the tree, which is why there's been more and more monster attacks, and people like Clarice have had to help up a watch to defeat the monsters before they could threaten the demigods. Having Tantalus as camp director doesn't really help. And as things continue to get worse and worse, Annabeth has an idea. There is one way to maybe save the tree. It's an incredible poison that can't be healed with any other technique like the Apollo kids have, but maybe the legendary Golden Fleece can do so. And that is in the Sea of Monsters. Coincidentally, maybe that's where the Grey Sisters were pointing them. In the Bermuda Triangle. She mentioned this to Dionysus, or Mr. D, but he didn't seem very impressed, so next time she said it in front of the entire camp at dinner. There, of course, it couldn't be refused, but instead of her or Percy getting the quest, it was Clarice. Things kind of go on as they did in canon, in the books, and Grover, who was still out on his quest to find Pan, created an empathy link with Percy to let him know the predicament he was in. With that information, and knowing that Grover is somewhere in the Sea of Monsters, he had to act, and so he tried to sneak out and go on the quest that wasn't even meant for him. Because they like him so much though, Tyson and Annabeth both went along with him to go on the quest. As they were about to try their best to just head south and then go towards the Bermuda Triangle, they met Hermes, who gave them a couple items to help, and gave them a hint of how to get to their destination. In fact, it was Luke's ship, a cruise ship filled with monsters. Again, things kind of happen as they did in the books, and they end up escaping on a lifeboat with the bottle of winds Hermes gave them to propel themselves. Though here's where things get crucial. Percy is not the son of Poseidon, so he doesn't have any control over the seas. This is a big issue, and whilst Tyson is the son of Poseidon, he can't really control the water like Percy did in the books, so they try to go to land as fast as possible. Annabeth recognizes the place and realizes that Luke, Thalia, and her made a shelter here where they briefly stayed at before coming to Camp Half-Blood. As things are looking up and they finally get some supplies, they encounter the Lernaean Hydra, a monster with many heads that, whenever one gets cut off, another one grows back. Percy tries his best and is reminded that Heracles used fire to burn the stumps of the heads so they wouldn't grow back. He tries to emulate that using his lightning powers, but it doesn't really work the same way. The Hydra is slowing down, but they're still getting cornered, but then Clarice, with her ship, starts blasting. Turns out she got a military ship from the American Civil War and used that to destroy monsters. She reluctantly brings the quote-unquote traitors of the camp on her ship and tells them what's going on. She, it turns out, did not bring any questmates, as she should have. Instead, she has dead soldiers indebted to Ares. Even though she doesn't like Percy, they combine their efforts and go towards the Sea of Monsters. Percy here, though, is almost useless on the ship. He doesn't know where they are, he can't do anything with the water. Though he can kind of approximate their location with the way the clouds are moving, but is far from exact coordinates. He can also slightly affect the winds, though it's not a sailboat, so it doesn't do much. He really should have rethought, because this quest is definitely not made for him, but he still needs to save his friend over anything. When trying to formally cross into the Sea of Monsters through Charybdis and Scylla, their ship is completely destroyed, and Percy and Annabeth get washed up on Circe's island. At first disguised as a spa, they quickly realize what's going on when Percy is turned into a guinea pig, supposedly for his father's crimes. He tries to argue that he's not a fan of Zeus either, but she doesn't listen, and Circe turns him into a guinea pig, but luckily Annabeth realizes what's going on before it's too late. When it gets interesting, though, is when they continue on their journey and find themselves next to the sirens. Annabeth really wants to hear their song, but Percy isn't having it, so he ties her to the mast as she requests, but of course Annabeth manages to wrangle her way out. In canon, this wasn't really an issue, as Percy was a son of Poseidon, therefore having a lot of control in the water. Here, though, he still jumps after into the water without having any water powers. As he saves Annabeth, he's about to fall unconscious himself, dooming both of them. But then, luckily for them, Tyson was able to save them. He doesn't quite have the powers of a demigod, but he is able to breathe underwater. And somehow, between Scylla and Charybdis and now, he was able to make it to them and notice that Percy was in trouble. He was able to bring Annabeth and Percy to deck and steer the ship away from the sirens and towards the island of Polyphemus. Percy told him the coordinates earlier, and whilst he doesn't have the same kind of coordinate vision as Percy did in canon, he is pretty good at charting on the seas. And later, when she's awake, Annabeth also helps him navigate properly. Percy was still kind of recovering from his wounds, as he did scrape rocks and almost drowned, being told by Annabeth how stupid of a maneuver it was. Though she is very grateful for, having saved her life, so she's not that mad. When they arrive at Polyphemus' cave, they don't just find Grover, who they were actually looking for, but they also find Clarice in a bride outfit for some reason. As everything finally seems to be going well, and they retrieve the fleece and fight off Polyphemus, with Tyson and Percy taking the brunt of the action, and Annabeth being more tricking, they managed to use their ship and escape from Polyphemus. When they made landfall, they were about to find a way to fly back to camp, as, of course, as a son of Zeus, there's no reason for Percy not to be able to fly. But just then, Luke found them. Before Clarice was able to get away, she was quickly taken with the fleece, and Percy was left to fight Luke. He tried his best, charging up electricity and even using that tactic that he used against Ares to teleport from place to place with lightning. It worked briefly, but the issue is there were just too many opponents, with the Lastrygonians, Dracone, and Luke, as well as other demigods with bow and arrows, and Tyson, Annabeth, and Clarice being threatened. Percy had to give up and stop fighting. Or rather, he pretended to stop fighting. There was water all around them, and so he sent electricity through it, creating steam, which he was able to transform into an iris message straight to camp, goading Luke to tell him, as well as the entire rest of the camp that were now watching, his mission to revive Kronos, destroy Thalia's tree, and blame Chiron. When he realized what was happening and slashed the iris message, it was already too late, and suddenly 100 centaurs were heard rushing the Princess Andromeda. Chiron was among them too, and him and a couple of his friends helped pick up Percy, Annabeth, Clarice, Tyson, and the fleece, and rushed their way back to Camp Half-Blood, leaving Luke's forces in disarray and confused, and Luke personally angry. They returned to camp victorious. Clarice was held up as a hero by other campers, though Percy was also noted for his bravery, and even though him and Annabeth shouldn't have gone on the quest and were previously banished for it, Chiron, now being back in power, forgave their charges. They then had a cavalry race that was supposed to have happened a couple weeks back, but was interrupted by monsters last time. One morning, Percy was woken up by Grover banging on his door. He yelled at him to wake up and go to Thalia's tree now. Something had happened. Something unexpected. Fearing for Annabeth, who had been guarding the tree overnight, he rushed over just to see two girls. Annabeth and another one who seemed eerily familiar. In fact, it was the same girl he saw last year in his dreams. He told some Apollo kids to bring nectar and ambrosia. He then asked the girl's name, and she responded with Thalia Grace. In that moment, the world seemed to darken, and a deep laughter seemed to be heard from under the earth. Just as Percy heard when he was in the underworld, almost dragged into Tartarus. With each laugh, the earth seemed to rumble, and Percy had finally understood why Kronos was called the Wicked One. All of this was a part of his machinations, another piece on the board for him to control, another child of the big three rapidly approaching the age of 16, who could become the child of prophecy, to either usher in a new golden age of the gods, or the new age of the Titans. A couple of hours went by and Thalia was taken to the healers to properly rest up. Percy then decided that even if this was all part of the Wicked One's plan, he would need to stand above it. It was his duty to protect the ones he cared about. And now that Thalia, his sister, was back again, he wanted to protect her too. He went in and introduced himself as Percy Jackson, her half-brother, son of Zeus. But instead of being happy to see her brother, she was sad. Sad that Zeus, her father, had another kid not too long after her. It was also a weird sense of deja vu. She felt like she had a brother before, but not Luke, like a real brother. But she ignored that feeling to focus on the reality of Percy Jackson being her real half-brother. He took her back to Cabin 1 to get her situated because she never actually went to Cabin 1. She died briefly before reaching it. And over the next few days, she slowly adapted to being a live human again, eating, sleeping, and so on. For her, it was like a long, long sleep. So it was always confusing for her to see how much time had actually passed, how grown Annabeth was, and how far out of her reach Luke now was. Though she was determined to speak to him and bring him back to the good side, Luke meanwhile was going mad with rage. He didn't know the fleece would bring back Thalia. If so, he would have never poisoned the tree. He almost killed Thalia, the one he cared about most, maybe apart from Annabeth. Also, he was mad at Kronos for not telling him. Obviously, he knew, but over everything, he wanted to talk to Thalia, to explain what's going on, to bring her to his side. Of course she would understand, he's doing the right thing. As the end of summer drew close, Percy decided he wouldn't go back to his mom for the rest of the year. He would stay in Camp Half-Blood year-round, at least for this year. He let his mom, Sally, know that he had to stay. His sister was now alive again. Monsters were appearing more and more. Some Half-Bloods were even defecting to Luke's side. Things were getting more and more serious. And so he felt he would abandon his friends if he left for their year and came back next year hoping everything would be just fine. As a son of Zeus, he was supposed to be a leader, and he knew Thalia and Annabeth needed him, as did Grover and Tyson, though Grover, of course, continued on a search, and Tyson was called to Poseidon's Forge to learn how to become a master craftsman and prepare for the coming war, a war with the Titans. Over the months, Percy continued to train, now especially with Thalia, who was able to teach him a few things about Zeus's powers. She also seemed to draw closer to him. Now she was more so angry at Zeus, because it wasn't Percy's fault for his birth. Naturally, her and Annabeth talked a lot, including about Luke, which Percy didn't particularly like. After hearing how Percy jumped into dangerous, siren-infested waters for Annabeth and got injured saving her, she scolded him, though Annabeth thanked him once more. And Percy never really took Thalia's scolding seriously anyways. He knew she would have done the same, so there's no point in scolding him. In the war games, Cabin 1 became the obvious powerhouse, and Athena and Zeus Cabin always pairing up meant that they would always win. As a result, Ares paired up with Apollo, Aphrodite, as well as a couple others, but even then, Athena and Zeus would still sometimes win. By this point, Percy is more powerful than his canon counterpart. One, he's a son of Zeus, and Zeus is the strongest god, but even ignoring that, he has much more training here, and had Thalia help him learn more about his powers. Taking this whole saving the world thing more seriously obviously helps out too. He's determined not to let the prophecy fall on Thalia, as she was already punished once for having been only a threat. As some demigods were leaving for the year and never coming back, therefore being thought of having defected to Luke or otherwise missing, they started looking more intensely for new demigods. Satyrs such as Grover stop their search for Pen and help find more demigods, and so in winter he calls Thalia, Annabeth, and Percy as he found 2, though he suspects there are monsters around, so he needs more help. Like any real hero, Percy has his mom drive them to the location Grover sent. She's actually gotten quite close to Thalia's. Thalia never really had a mother to rely on, and Sally's kind enough to adopt any stray demigod she sees. At the door they're met by teachers who don't recognize Percy and his group. Though Thalia showed him a trick especially for these kind of situations, and he learned how to manipulate the mist to trick mortals into believing whatever they'll tell him. Not really whatever, but they can get away with a lot of lying. So instead of Thalia, it's Percy who uses the mist and controls it and tricks the mortals into believing that they're just regular students. They go into this military-style school and realize that there's a dance going on. They split up not to attract attention and keep an eye on the demigods. They're in a corner somewhere, a brother and a sister. Thalia goes with Grover, and Annabeth is stuck with Percy. Since it's a dance though, and they're standing in the middle of the room, they're kinda supposed to dance. Annabeth starts taking the initiative and starts to dance, and Percy starts acting accordingly. Annabeth's feelings for Percy have grown stronger since the Sea of Monsters, since she's realized to what lengths Percy will go to rescue her if needed. Percy is a bit oblivious, though of course he likes Annabeth too. Though before he's able to think too much of it, they see the kids that they were supposed to be taken care of, they're gone. Percy grabs Riptide out of his pocket and prepares to fight. He starts running and tells Annabeth to go grab the others and meet her. Well, he doesn't know where yet, but wherever the other kids went. She freezes for a second, but then agrees and starts running over to Thalia. Meanwhile, Percy is facing a monster called the Manticore, who's apparently working for Luke and some sort of general and is trying to kidnap these demigods. He starts fighting the Manticore, though being careful that the other kids don't get hurt. He also can't really use his electricity powers as they might get caught in the crossfire or get stung by the Manticore. So he just kind of has to keep him at bay and wait for the others to arrive. As Thalia starts running over, a helicopter starts buzzing around them. Grover leads the 2 young demigods to safety so Percy can really unleash his power. And he starts showing off all the power that he gained over the past few months training with his sister. Channeling his immense power through his sword, he's able to call a lightning strike on the helicopter, which makes it crash into the valley next to them. He then focuses back on the Manticore, but for some reason Annabeth is on top of the Manticore. She rushed in and managed to get past Percy and Thalia before they even knew it, and was now trying to fight this beast with a dagger. An admirable but somewhat stupid strategy. Percy really didn't understand, for a daughter of Athena, sometimes she had the weirdest ideas. Before he could do anything though, a hunting horn could be heard, and suddenly arrows started whizzing. Thalia muttered something along the lines of, "Oh great," but it almost distracted Percy from seeing that the Manticore was almost jumping down the ravine with Annabeth still on his back. Percy though, with his reflexes sharpened, wouldn't let it happen. He once again channeled his power, but this time trying something that he'd been practicing but hadn't really mastered, so he really hoped it worked this time. He would use the lightning as some form of transportation, but not just from one place to another, but rather riding it across a distance. The Manticore obviously paled in comparison to the speed of a lightning strike, and so Percy was able to ride the lightning horizontally, grab Annabeth, and land on the other side of the valley, whilst the Manticore was still falling down normally, but this time without a demigod on his back. Percy meanwhile held Annabeth in a bridal-style position, telling her everything was going to be alright. He really felt like a hero this time, which he was. After making sure with Thalia and Grover that everyone was fine, they had to address the elephant in the room. The group of a couple dozen young girls with bows and hunting gear. Thalia mentioned that these are the hunters of Artemis, and she ran across them once with Luke. Percy wasn't as smart as Annabeth, but even he could tell that it definitely didn't go well last time. They ended up speaking to Artemis and her first lieutenant, Zoe Nightshade, and recounted the events of what happened. Even though Artemis wasn't known for her kindness to males, somehow Percy impressed her enough, and she actually complimented him on his power and his ability to save his friend Annabeth. Though he later thought that maybe all she cared about was Annabeth's safety, and Percy was just the guy that got her from A to B. They then faced the young demigods who they were there to rescue in the first place, a young boy called Nico and his sister Bianca. According to Artemis, Bianca had the heart of a true maiden, and so she was offered the immortality of a huntress. After some thinking, she accepted. Even though she didn't want to leave her brother behind, it felt like she had to do this for herself. For the first time in her life, she had to do something for her sake, not others. Once Percy understood her dilemma, he felt it was foolish and selfish of her to ignore her sibling and just do whatever is best for her. He would obviously never do such a thing. And just as things couldn't get any better, Artemis mentioned that she was off to hunt, but this time alone, and the hunters of Artemis were to be led to Camp Half-Blood to camp there until Artemis returned. And so they waited for Apollo to ride them back to Camp Half-Blood. They stood there waiting for the sun to rise. As he was waiting for Apollo to arrive, he noticed it was getting brighter and a lot warmer. The snow was starting to melt, and when he saw the sun in the sky, he realized it was getting closer and closer. Naturally, it turned out to be Apollo, who at Artemis's request drove the campers and the hunters back to camp. Annabeth sat next to Percy and explained to him that the last time that the hunters visited wasn't really good for camp, or the hunters really, so this wasn't going to be great. But of course, ordered by Artemis herself, they couldn't well refuse. Apollo, sick of driving the chariot himself, decided that, well, another demigod should drive. He thought about it for a second, and thought maybe the daughter of Athena? No. Daughter of Zeus, maybe. But Thalia immediately declined and ran to the back of the bus. And so he set his eyes on Percy and wouldn't take no for an answer. And so now Percy was stuck driving the chariot of Apollo. He hadn't gotten his real license, but he didn't think it'd be that tough. But little did he know, this was a lot harder than driving a regular car. As he increased the speed, he noticed that the area behind them got warmer and warmer, and actually looked like summer, whilst the area in front of them looked still like dead winter. Without much hassle though, they made it back to camp, as, well, Percy's not really afraid of heights like Thalia, and he has some knowledge of how to drive a car. His mom let him drive the car occasionally, mostly to get some experience. When they arrived at camp, Chiron greeted the hunters and announced that the war games would be held, with the campers against the hunters. Usually Thalia would be miffed, but this time she's excited. The camp is more unified than it ever seemed before, and Percy is a powerhouse on his own. Naturally, she had also gotten stronger. This time also with Annabeth at the helm, they had a good strategy to prepare, and of course Thalia and Percy working together, children of Zeus, with their ultimate power. Safe to say, they were gonna win this one. They split off with Thalia being the one in defense and Percy going for the flag in offense. Even though he was given a team to support him, Percy ran ahead of them to go for the flag. Before he could reach it, there was an array of arrows shot at him from all sides, and in front of him stood the lieutenant of the Huntresses of Artemis, Zoe Nightshade. Percy grinned not to be deterred and immediately went in for a fight. While still being shot at from every direction, he used a sword while Zoe used her daggers. Percy wasn't quite as confident anymore because Zoe was really fast, more than you'd expect. And she seemed to have incredible amounts of experience with her daggers, more than she let on for sure. But of course, he was a demigod, son of Zeus. This wasn't going to be a challenge for him. He hated the arrogance of his father, though he must admit, Zeus's power was incredible, and he had just enough of it. He used his powers more to increase his speed, and also started flickering electricity in every direction with his sword slashes. Every time her daggers met his sword, she felt a shock through them, and so she was being pushed back. Now Percy's allies caught up to him, and they were taking care of the other huntresses nearby. Everything was looking good for the demigods, but then Zoe called even more reinforcement. Was this a trap? He realized that having to fight even more opponents could become troublesome, and so he tried his best to run past Zoe, go for the flag, and bring it back to his team. As he did though, Zoe started sprinting behind him, and she seemed to get really angry. She sounded more and more frustrated as she was calling more of her allies to stop Percy from running back to the side of the forest. But alas, she couldn't stop him, and Percy won the game of Capture the Flag, for the side of Camp Half-Blood. The campers were incredibly happy, lifting Percy up as a hero, but of course Thalia and Annabeth definitely got their dues. Mostly Annabeth though, Thalia didn't really do that much this match. The hunters weren't that excited. They had to be in camp, and they didn't even win their usual easy game of Capture the Flag. He wanted to go over to Zoe to ask her why she was so upset during the match, but Annabeth told him that that's a stupid idea and he should definitely not do that. So he didn't. Just when the festivities were really starting though, something weird happened. The Oracle of Delphi, who had been confined to the big house, was up and walking. Straight, unmistakably, to Zoe Nightshade. And she said the words, "Approach, Seeker, and ask." What is my quest?" Zoe asked, and the oracle explained. Percy never really understood prophecies that well, but later Annabeth explained to him that Artemis was taken prisoner, and it was Zoe's quest to save her mistress, along with campers and hunters alike. Maybe that was the real challenge, Percy thought, but he didn't want to say it. Everyone convened in the big house to determine what would happen next, and who Zoe would take on her quest. To Percy's surprise, Annabeth immediately asked to go. She wanted to save Artemis, and of course, go on a mission with the Huntress. She wouldn't say no to that. Zoe, willing to take any intelligent, powerful demigod girl, of course immediately accepted Annabeth's offer and took her as one of the 5 questmates. She had also decided that Phoebe and Bianca were the other 2 huntresses that were going along with her, and so there was one more spot for a demigod. Immediately, Percy and Thalia both stood up. Technically, Thalia was the head member of the cabin, and so only she was supposed to be there, but everyone kinda accepted Percy as very powerful and popular, so he was invited to all the meetings. Zoe was not having it though, and she immediately pointed at Thalia and said, "Yeah, you can go, but we're not taking any boys." Percy was annoyed, and Thalia thought about dropping out for his little brother's sake, but decided that she should go, to help Annabeth, is what Percy would want anyways. So they make preparations to go the next morning. As fate would have it though, similar as in canon, Phoebe was not feeling very good the next morning, and so when they prepared to go on the quest as just 4 members, Bianca, Zoe, Annabeth, and Thalia, Percy immediately sprinted up and told them that he's going to be their 5th member. Zoe again refused, saying that not only do they not need a 5th member, but it certainly doesn't need to be him. But this time, Thalia would back her bro up. Annabeth also explained that 1, they definitely do need to have 5 members if the prophecy said so, and 2, Percy is an incredibly powerful demigod. Furthermore, he's also a son of Zeus, but for some reason that made Zoe even madder. But she couldn't well decline if the strategist of the group told her that Percy was a valuable asset that they need to bring. And so, reluctantly, Percy was allowed to go on the quest as the only guy. So the quest to retrieve Artemis turned out to be Zoe, Bianca, Percy, Annabeth, and Thalia. They started this trip similarly, first going to the museum where they found Luke and the General, where they then had to fight the Nemean lion. Luckily though, Percy was prepared for this kind of monster. He used his electricity and amped it to the max and was able to tase the monster to finally go to sleep and eventually disintegrate. It wasn't the whole team ordeal as in canon, it was more so Percy just amped up his power enough so the beast would die. Zoe was impressed but still annoyed that this boy, this hero, son of Zeus, was along the quest. But what surprised her is that even though he himself slew it, Percy didn't immediately go for the cloak that the Nemean lion left behind, that is. Instead, he offered it to Thalia and Annabeth, who would surely find a better way to use it other than Percy using it as a coat. They ended up just stuffing it in the trunk of the car that they were using. They continued on the quest, and finally Percy got some time to talk to Zoe himself, alone. It was in the car whilst everyone was sleeping, but Zoe, naturally being the one to drive, was still awake. Percy, meanwhile, was in the passenger seat. Things were quiet for a long time, but then Percy asked, "What is it you hate about Zeus?" When Annabeth mentioned I'm the son of Zeus, you got even angrier. Why? She didn't really want to talk about it, but she admitted that a son of Zeus, or a long time ago, had hurt her deeply, and so she hated Zeus ever since. And to be honest, all male heroes really. They're all the same. They all idolize the same heroes, even though they were terrible people. Percy understands where she comes from and tells her that his mother named him Perseus because he was the only one that seemed like a good guy with also a good ending. And so he wanted to emulate Perseus' luck. She kinda giggled at it, but didn't really help her soothe her worries. As the conversation dropped down, Percy was starting to feel tired, and so he tried sleeping. Though, as he does way too often, he dreamed of a man rescuing a woman from a garden with a dragon. He understood that this man was Heracles. At the end of the dream, the woman was sad as the man had left, taking everything she offered to help, giving nothing in return and breaking his promise. He woke up still in the middle of the night and realized that it was her. They kind of looked similar, but it was for sure her. The same smile, the same annoyed face. Zoe was talking about Hercules, or Heracles. He asked, but it was a sore subject, so he dropped it immediately. He didn't want the car to explode, so they kept on driving, this time in silence. Eventually, they crossed a desert, and the car ran out of fuel, so they had to start walking as they didn't find anywhere to refuel. They found a junkyard-looking place, but everything was the opposite of what a junkyard usually is. It was pristine, silver and gold. Full automatons, weapons, armor pieces. Before Percy could go over and try out a piece of armor or a sword, Annabeth warned him, "This is Hephaestus' junkyard. Junkyard of the gods. Don't touch anything." Nevertheless, they still had to cross it to get to the other side, and so they kept walking. through mountains of quote-unquote junk surely worth millions of dollars. Of course, even with a warning, things would never go as simple as just walking through a place. And so Talos, the giant automaton, started waking up, which rumbled the earth. All because Bianca had stolen just a tiny figurine to carry back for her brother. Percy tried to use his electricity to fry the automaton, though he failed. And so they have to keep running and running until Bianca finally turned around and decided that she was going to try her best. She saw an opening on the left foot of the automaton, and so that was definitely a space where you could get inside and control it, and then shut it off. Before anyone could argue though, she was already off running. And just when the automaton started to step down on her, it appeared that she was gone. Though luckily she wasn't squashed on the ground, so likely she made it inside. A couple of minutes later, whilst it was still chasing the group minus Bianca, suddenly it started shutting down. But then it fell over. A giant dust cloud covered everything, but when everything finally settled, Percy regrouped with Thalia, Annabeth, and Zoe, searching for Bianca, but they couldn't find her. They continued searching for hours, but no luck. Depressed, they finally continued. But that's when they understood. This was the land with no rain. It was fated to happen. They would lose a quest member. So truly, she was dead. When Zoe gave Bianca a true funeral, fit for a huntress who died in battle, they continued on their journey. When they were thinking of their next steps, as well as how to actually move somewhere, because now they were just on foot with no equipment, a black, long-stretched limousine drove up to them. In the driver's seat, a god walked out, Ares to be specifically. He smiled at Percy, telling him that they're not here to fight this time. Then he walked to the back of the car and opened the door, telling Percy to get in and the others to wait. With some god's magic, he suddenly opened a cafe right next to them, where the others should wait. When Percy got inside, he saw Annabeth? No, definitely not Annabeth. She seemed different. Later he understood it was Aphrodite. She asked him why he was on this quest. Maybe he cared a bit about Artemis, but that wasn't the reason he would risk his life on this dangerous quest, is it? He answered no reluctantly, and understood why Aphrodite made this journey, why she was grilling him all this way. He then answered, for my friend. A friend, huh? Aphrodite didn't believe him. What are you talking about? Percy asked. Well, listen, I can't tell you everything, else it wouldn't be interesting, would it? But let me tell you this, your feelings are very strong, as are hers. And I foresee that you and her will have a lot of challenges in the future. If you can survive, and perhaps her too, you will find yourselves happier than ever. If you can't, well, there's no point in us talking. That was all the talk he had with the goddess of love. Ares dragged him out of the car, and as soon as Percy blinked, the gods were gone, as was their limousine. Percy regrouped with the other questers and talked about it, but he didn't really want to talk about, Aphrodite. Or rather, what she said. So he lied, telling them that even though they lost a quest member, they shouldn't give up now and that they should persevere and save Artemis. But Zoe wasn't really believing it. So she just told Percy to not listen to anything that Aphrodite told him. She's a tricky goddess and has been known to lie. A lot. And with that, they continued on their journey. They continued walking on foot as they didn't have anything else, but then finally they were met by another strange man. He looked homeless, but almost too good to be homeless. It felt like it was performative, like an actor in a movie. And he asked them if they needed to get west. They answered yes, of course. And suddenly when they turned around, there were whole train tracks with a train running in 5 minutes. As the others marveled at how the hell this thing just appeared, Percy turned around to the man and asked him, Apollo? He shushed him down, telling him that he shouldn't be here and that he definitely can't be called Apollo, then told Percy that it's important they rescue his sister. And of course, defeat the monsters too, but mostly carry his sister. When Percy was about to ask what kind of monsters, Apollo was already gone, and the train was rapidly approaching. When they finally boarded it, the train seemed to move incredibly quickly, and at the current pace, they were going to be in California just next morning. Percy talked a bit more with Zoe, telling her that Bianca's death wasn't her fault, but maybe he should have worded that a bit differently. She also talked more about Heracles, and also about the sword that Percy was wielding. It belonged to him initially. Or rather, it belonged to her, but she gave it to him. Afterwards, he felt bad having it and offered it back to her, but she declined. He was a son of Zeus, and was wielding the same sword that Hercules did, but he was different. Far too caring for Heracles' sake. So she told him to keep it, and use it to protect his friends. Of course he would. Then he told us stories about how he doesn't like Zeus particularly either. He hadn't helped much to rescue his mom, or really tell him anything the first 12 years of his life. Finally, they made it to California. As they prepared to go up to Mount Othrys, they were met by Luke and his forces. Not just that, but a weird mooing could be heard around. Behind them there was water, and they saw a weird cow-fish creature. Even weirder, it was looking straight at Percy, but he didn't speak cow, and he didn't know of anyone else that did. So he had to train his ADHD brain to ignore this weird cow creature and focus on his opponent right in front of him. A fight broke out, though Luke didn't have much chance with Thalia, Annabeth, Percy, and Zoe being there. And so the Manticore this time was definitely defeated by Thalia and Percy working together, and Luke decided to flee. They took this as a small win, and then prepared to storm Mount Othrys to free Artemis. And it was then that Percy understood why Zoe had been so nervous to go on this quest, or rather, the last day specifically. They now both understood that the general waiting for him was Atlas, father of Zoe Nightshade. He wanted to reassure her, but he didn't know how. So he thought the best way of doing things was to get it over with. And so they prepared to go out to Mount Othrys. Annabeth had an idea of how to get up quick, and so they went to her dad's place to ask kindly to use his car. Using that, they started driving when suddenly they were hit by lightning, though gladly they made it all out safely. It immediately made Thalia start cursing though. She cursed Zeus, cursed her father. Percy was still kind of shell-shocked and wasn't able to speak, but he started understanding. Thalia was scared of the prophecy too. It spoke of someone dying by their father's hand. This would definitely fit that description. Was Zeus really trying to kill them? Why would he stop their quest? Did he not want his daughter saved? And why did he want his other daughter killed? Now Percy was starting to get angry too, but he stopped himself. He understood that this is exactly what his opponents want. Kindly he went over to Thalia and got her out of her little angry trance. And finally they were now prepared as ever to go up to face that titan, Atlas. Zoe, once again faced with Ladin, the dragon of the Hesperides garden, tried to tame him once more as she used to. But it didn't end up working, so they had to run from dragon now on top of everything else. Finally though, they met face to face with Luke, Atlas, and a whole bunch of monsters, and immediately the fight began. Whilst Percy and Thalia immediately started fighting, Percy storming Atlas that is, Thalia was now confronted with Luke. She hadn't seen him since she was revived, and he hadn't seen her either. They both forgot that they were on the battlefield for a second, and she asked him why he was doing what he is. He responded with his usual spiel that the gods are evil and that they needed a revolution. She tried to convince him that he was wrong, but he seemed dead set on his ways. And so, looking back at Annabeth, Artemis, and Zoe, as well as seeing Percy fight for his life, she decided that she knew exactly what side she was fighting for. And so she drew her weapon and charged Luke. As the battle continued, Annabeth tried thinking of a way of getting Artemis in battle, as having God on their side would surely help them. And so she ran over to Percy, who was kind of getting his ass beat, though he was doing just fine for a demigod. He was completely charged up to the max and used all the power he had available to him. As monsters tried to get closer to help their master Atlas, they seemed to immediately disintegrate, with Percy's incredible electricity flowing around him like an aura, protecting him. Furthermore, his sword was as fast as a lightning strike, and Atlas did seem impressed at this demigod's power, though of course, one of the strongest titans facing a demigod was still no challenge for him. Though in a brief break of the battle, Annabeth whispered her plan in Percy's ear, and so, even though he wasn't very excited about it, he agreed. He dared Atlas to hit him, boasting that he was the son of Zeus with incredible power imbued in his sword, though Percy, while saying that, started moving backwards, bit by bit. Finally, when Atlas charged him, he tried to escape, though he wasn't quite as fast as the Titan, and so he was still beaten back, immediately smashing into Artemis, who was now scurrying away from him. When he opened his eyes back up, he realized he was now holding the sky. His shoulders were burning, as his entire body felt like a hydraulic press being pressed down. Though immediately in front of him, he saw the moon itself shoot a ray of arrows in every direction and focus her might on Atlas. Every second felt like an intense battle. But Atlas and Artemis started getting closer and closer, when finally Atlas was pushed back by one of Artemis' arrows and smashed into Percy now. This time Percy was the one sent flying afterwards, and Atlas was back in his position he had been for thousands of years, holding up the sky. Percy, meanwhile, was unconscious, though only for a few seconds, and as soon as he regained consciousness, he realized the battle was now fairly on their side. Atlas was stuck holding up the heavens whilst the monsters were being pushed back, and Luke was now having a time fighting Thalia. She was always more powerful than him, but he thought he grew more powerful now. The monsters were hurrying away, as was Luke, and they realized that Zoe was hurt, badly. She had been struck by Atlas's spear, and she was starting to bleed out. As Percy tried doing everything he could, he realized nothing would save Zoe. As in the prophecy, is fated, her death by her father's hand. After she died, they wept for her, but then realized that the winter solstice was near, and so Artemis would need to rush to Olympus, quick. She brought Thalia, Percy, and Annabeth along, and so they would give their account of the battle and their journey and the quest of what happened. As they did, naturally, they were viewed as heroes, though there was an important challenge coming up. Thalia now seemed to be almost 16, with her having slightly aged whilst in tree form. Of course, the prophecy spoke of someone at the age of 16 either destroying or preserving Olympus, so they had to act now. But similarly as in the books, Artemis offered her position as lieutenant of the Huntress to Thalia, and she gladly accepted. Seeing that Luke had no way of returning to good, and Percy being squarely in the camp of the Half-Bloods, protecting them at every turn, she felt good going towards the path of a Huntress. That seemed to make everyone happy, and then they had a party, of course. Percy was congratulated by most gods, though reprimanded by Athena, also by Poseidon, who told him that he saw that Percy encountered the Ophiuchores, the cow monster. A similar thing happened as in the books when Poseidon, of course, mentioned to Zeus that the Ophiuchores was once again revived and they wanted to kill it, though Percy spoke for it, not wanting it to die. Of course, he got what he wanted, as Zeus was quite happy at his son's accomplishments, though Athena reprimanded him for him being so close to her daughter, and Poseidon reprimanded him for being so careless with such a powerful monster, and with the future of the Half-Bloods and the world, though he still got congratulated by all other Olympian gods, and even shortly by his own father, who told him something like, "Good job." But the real highlight of the night was that he even got to dance with Annabeth. But then, as all good things have to come to an end, they returned to Camp Half-Blood. Thalia, Annabeth, and Percy, hailed as heroes and successful in their quest, though they were told of all the countless bad things that happened as well, and of course, the 2 deaths. The hunters were sad, though happy to take up Thalia as their new lieutenant, and so the hunters departed, and Percy and Annabeth led the camp until the next summer, though Percy would be going back home this time. He had enough of the demigod life for a while, so he wanted to go back to his mom to enjoy a relatively mortal, regular life. Little did he know, he would be called back much sooner than expected. It had been half a year since he helped save Artemis from Mount Othrys, and in those 6 months he hadn't done anything demigod-like. Sure, he trained a bit on the side, but he was focused on a new school, making some friends, and enjoying the time with his mom. As his luck would have it, when he was doing an orientation for a high school he would attend after the summer, of course he was attacked by monsters. Not just that, as the Impusai were closing in on him, there was a mortal girl who seemed to be able to see his sword and the monsters approaching. He realized that she was similar to his own mom, a clear-seeing mortal. Though he didn't have much time to talk, as he was still being chased by monsters, and so he had to get out of the premises pretty quickly. Of course, first though, he took care of the Impusai. He eventually made his way back to camp, where he would quickly realize how much he missed over the last few months. It appears that Kronos, seeing the disaster of the Battle of Mount Othrys, sped up his plans, trying to defeat the demigods before they grew more powerful. Specifically, he was scared of Percy growing in power to the likes of someone like Heracles in his day, a demigod powerful enough to rival an immortal. He learned that the campers were now all preoccupied with the labyrinth, which Annabeth told him could be used by Luke to defeat the campers whilst they were sleeping, as of course the labyrinth had grown in size tremendously since the ancient days, and now there was an opening right in camp, behind the barrier. If Luke managed to traverse the maze, they would be able to lead an entire army of monsters right into camp in the dead of night, without any warning. They told him that they tried plugging the holes, but whenever they did, a new one would appear 20 meters to the right. It was powerful magic, certainly none that they could defeat with simple explosives. They tried leading expeditions through, but it always ended badly. And they even found Chris Rodriguez, who had been working for Luke, stuck in the maze, who had completely lost his sanity. Percy slowly got back into the groove of camp, meeting new campers, eating, training. and meeting the new weapons expert called Quintus, who seemed a bit strange and had a hellhound for a dog. Though finally, with fear of monster attacks growing, they decided to take up a quest. Furthermore, it was decided that Annabeth was the one to lead it. Clarice had done a lot of work too, but she decided that one quest was enough for her and she certainly didn't want to go back to the labyrinth. Annabeth, on the other hand, did. Her questmates were to be Percy Jackson and Grover Underwood, kind of like the old times for the quest of the lightning thief. Though for some reason she didn't fully want to share her quest. It seemed that one or two lines at the end were missing, but Percy didn't really care. He trusted Annabeth above everyone else. So if she said it was fine to go, then that was it. They quickly started on their way through the labyrinth, but quickly realized that they did not understand how to navigate it properly. Annabeth had some ideas, all of which sounded really impressive, but none of which worked, sadly. When they took a break to sleep a bit, Percy had a dream of Nico, the boy he helped rescue last year from Westover Hall, whose sister tragically died whilst fighting Talos. He'd completely disappeared after he learned of his sister's fate, but of course, Percy and Annabeth and Grover knew that he was likely the son of Hades, with powers he displayed whilst running away, that is. Even now in Percy's dream, he was surrounded by ghosts, but they gave him terrible advice. He seemed to be trying to find a way to talk to his sister's soul. Not much after that though, Percy woke up and they had to continue on their own mission. Eventually, they made it to Garion's farm, where Nico in this timeline was actually happy to see Percy. The reason is because he didn't blame Percy for Bianca's death, rather he blamed all demigods, and the gods too. But Percy particularly never made any promise to protect her. He was chosen for the quest, and so he was there just like she was. They ended up making it through Garion's farm, and Nico started joining them on their quest. Meanwhile, in the labyrinth, they met a certain demigod called Ethan Nakamura, a son of Nemesis, goddess of divine retribution. He too, similarly to Luke, was sick of the old order, the order of the gods, who seemed to hate their children just like the monsters who roamed the earth, who'd lost their divine right to rule after millennia of bad leadership. After helping him out a bit and giving him some provisions, they left off and he went the other direction, though they would meet sooner than expected. Quickly after, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover were trapped by Luke, brought to a huge arena filled with demigods, monsters, and even a few giants. Though not the legendary Gigantes, those were just regular, run-of-the-mill giants. Most notably was a son of Poseidon and Gaia, Antaeus, a legendary old king of the Greeks. Percy had heard of him before. He knew there was a big rivalry between children of Poseidon, Zeus, and Hades, though there weren't that many children of Hades. Percy himself actually didn't mind Poseidon. He liked him just fine, and of course he liked Tyson too, who was Poseidon's son. Not just that, but for helping out his son and the Ophiuchores, when Poseidon and Percy had some time to talk last winter, he promised him that when he was ever in a time of need, he should call for Poseidon's help, and he would aid him best he can. Of course, he wasn't going to forget if an Olympian god offered his help, so that was always in the back of his mind. He had a feeling, though, even in the face of that promise, Poseidon would be a bit reluctant to kill his own son for Percy's help. For a reason no one could really understand, Percy was made to fight in the Colosseum, or arena, whatever you want to call it. First, regular monsters, which he defeated easily, but finally, Antaeus himself. Percy made a deal that if he won, him and his friends could leave, peacefully. Of course, Antaeus accepted, only ever having lost to Heracles himself. But this brat was not as wise, powerful, or experienced as Heracles, though what he was smarter than in the books. He instantly remembered that Antaeus was the son of Gaia and Poseidon, which means that if he was touching the earth, it would be nigh impossible to defeat him. Thus, his first mission was to get him off the ground, so he would actually have a fighting chance. Of course, luckily for him, he was also a son of Zeus, similar to Heracles. And Zeus was a master in sending things in the air. Percy tried summoning incredibly powerful winds that were going to pick up his enemy, though it was very difficult in the labyrinth. They were underground and miles away from any entrance to the open air. Though it was helping in getting Antaeus off his balance, Percy quickly charged him, slashing at his legs, which made Antaeus jump up to avoid his attack, but of course it was all feint from Percy's side. He charged up a lightning strike, imbued it in his sword, and threw the sword at Antaeus in the air whilst he couldn't defend himself. It hit right where Percy thought his heart might be, which made Antaeus disintegrate. Their fight lasted barely a minute, and the monsters were stunned. Though unlike for all of Percy's previous fights with lesser monsters, this time the crowd was not cheering him. Instead, they were starting to rush him to kill him. This was a sign for Annabeth and Grover to try to escape, and Percy would help them. Next thing they knew, they were running away from a horde of monsters trying to get away, not even looking for anything specifically. But, of course, when they finally stopped running, they realized they were in front of Hephaestus' forge. Inside was, of course, the god tinkering away, and he told them that one of his other forges in the heart of a volcano was being occupied by monsters, and that they should check it out, and if he was right about the monsters, vanquish them. In return, he was going to help them navigate the labyrinth. Even though they didn't want to admit it, they had to accept this quest. They had no idea how to navigate the labyrinth, and so they had to accept any help that they could, especially from God. One of Hephaestus' automatons led them to the forge, and he was right, it truly was in the heart of a volcano. Percy was very impressed. And lo and behold, there were monsters inside. Kilkenny's to be specific. Warmed up and not wanting his friends to be hurt, Percy told Grover and Annabeth to stand back and he was going to defeat the monsters. But he saw there were a lot more than he expected, and they were forging weapons for the Titan army, so he had to be a bit more destructive than usual. He gathered all the power he had, and a lightning storm gathered above them. The wind picked up, and the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees in an instant. Just as the monsters realized what was about to happen, it was too late. Percy, with all this power charged up, struck the heart of the volcano, and it made it all explode. Though he wasn't quite thinking about how destructive it really was going to be. It wasn't just going to destroy the monsters, in fact it was going to make the entire volcano blow up. Good thing Annabeth and Grover stood back because he didn't know how he was going to protect them, and honestly even himself. Next thing he knew, he woke up on a beautiful looking island, guarded by a girl. He had some injuries, but nothing too bad. His memory was a bit fuzzy, and he talked to the girl, a lot. Initially, she seemed a bit rude, wanting him to get off the island as fast as possible. But over a week or so, she started warming up to him. She mentioned that she hadn't been off this island for 3,000 years, and so he explained to her how much the outside world had changed. The big cities of New York, and everything she'd missed. Finally, though, he decided that he would need to leave. Calypso, the girl, was none too pleased about it. She begged him to stay, but knew that it was fruitless. After that conversation, she told him why she was there and why he appeared on her island. It was all part of her curse for being the daughter of Atlas. He promised to her that when this is all over, he'll try his best to ask his father, which, she knows now that his father is Zeus, to release her and all the innocents captured after the war. This is exactly the reason why Luke has so much momentum, because the gods are stupid. And Percy, if he ever gets the chance, will definitely let his father know. But with that, he's off. He needs to save his camp. And Calypso waves him goodbye. He sat in a raft waiting for something magical to happen, and it slowly drifted into nothingness. But finally, when he woke up a few hours later, he saw Camp Half-Blood. He swam across to witness something weird. They were mourning, everyone. And Annabeth was giving a speech. That's kind of unlike her. And, it's his funeral. He attends his own funeral. He tries clearing up that he's not dead and is in fact right there, but it actually seems to make Annabeth kind of mad. And so, without saying a word, she slaps him across the face, though makes up with him later. A couple hours later, when everyone's calmed down, they decide that they need to go back to Labyrinth. Their quest is not finished. They haven't found Daedalus, and their camp is still very much in danger of Luke's attack. Finally, though, Percy has an idea. They failed to go back to Hephaestus for him to help them find the way through the camp, but he understood now that Ariadne knew of a way, and she was immortal. The answer was in front of them all this time. They were constantly being tricked by the labyrinth because they couldn't see clearly enough, but a clear-sighted mortal could. He thought about getting his mom, but that wouldn't really work. For one, he didn't want to put her in danger, and two, maybe she wasn't the right pick. But just then he remembered another girl, also a clear-sighted mortal, who he'd met in school not too long ago. She also saw him fight off monsters, so maybe she already suspected the truth. Percy went back home to get her help, as she wrote her phone number on Percy's hand right before he left. Annabeth kinda ticked off though, went along with him, and they were able to recruit her to go back to Labyrinth. And fair enough, Percy was right. She was able to lead them right to Daedalus without any intervention. Just when Percy thought the quest was finally going to be over, it had barely even started. Daedalus' workshop was empty until Quintus arrived. He walked down the steps from the top to where Percy and the group was. He explained to them that he was Daedalus in his fifth body, hence the name Quintus. Or rather, he was an automaton with Daedalus' soul. Cheating death was a sin beyond all else, and so he for sure was going to be tortured when he went to Hades. But he had successfully put it off for thousands of years. Percy was almost marveling at it when Luke arrived. Quintessence sold them out. Apparently, he just wanted to be on the winning side of the war, and he suggested that Kronos was the one who was going to defeat the Olympians. Not just that, but out of a jar, he took something precious. It was the original Ariadne string. With that, you didn't need any clear-sighted mortal. You would immediately know where to go. It was like a GPS, but made specifically for the labyrinth. And of course, he gave it to Luke. With that, a battle broke out, and Percy took Annabeth and the group and left. They quickly made it back to camp expecting a battle to begin, as Luke now had everything he needed. And not a day later, the monster invasion came. At the helm was Luke, though he seemed a bit different. He seemed proud. And more noticeable, his eyes were golden, his voice deeper, and his strategy more cunning. He was now a more evil titan than mortal man. In the day of preparation, though, Percy made some adjustments himself. He called the Hunters of Artemis, begging Thalia to help him. Of course, she would. Furthermore, he called on Nico to help them, which would be a huge help. And he sent an iris message to his friend Tyson, who was still working in the Cyclopes Forge, producing weapons, but he would make an exception to fight for Percy. And so, in the greatest hour of need, a lot of allies came to help them. With all that help, they were able to beat back Luke's forces and make them scurry back into the labyrinth, tucking their tail between their legs. A lot of monsters were vanquished, yes, but so were demigods. A lot of camp was destroyed, and just when they were starting to rebuild, Quintus came. Though he seemed not to be on Luke's side anymore, or at least not really. He came to apologize to Percy and Annabeth personally, and giving Annabeth all of the knowledge she had gathered over the last 3,000 years, knowing it would be in good hands, he decided that he would face his judgment, and finally move on to Hades, bring his labyrinth down at the same time, as it was tied to his own life force. They were sad about Daedalus' death, though had a lot to celebrate too. They successfully defended the camp, and now the labyrinth wasn't really an issue anymore. The entrance was sealed, and so were all else, and perhaps some monsters died too, whilst the labyrinth was still crumbling with everyone inside. Though, of course, Percy knew Luke was not that easy to beat, or rather, Kronos. He wasn't sure, but it felt like Luke was not alone in his body anymore. He was being controlled by Kronos. Chiron told him that later. It was clear with his golden-colored eyes. The Luke they knew all along was now truly gone. Annabeth wept a bit, but having Thalia and Percy there to soothe her made things a lot easier. Percy stayed for the rest of the summer, but then decided, as he did last year, to go back to his mortal life. Things were ramping up, yes, but they were now more united than they had been before. Poseidon's forces, Artemis's huntresses, and rogue demigods like Nico, who weren't fully committed to camp but were still willing to fight for it, were all helping defend the camp, and in addition, defeat any monster trying to take down the Olympians. Percy spent a lot of time thinking about what he was fighting for. He thought of his sister Thalia, his mom, and Annabeth. Naturally his friends too, but these three were like family. And thinking back on the last 3 years, he realized what Annabeth really meant to him. Mustering his courage for a while, and talking to every demigod, satyr, and nymph in the whole camp, he decided to finally ask Annabeth out. Luckily for him, she accepted. And so, before the summer ended, Percy and Annabeth were officially a couple. Percy was now much less sure whether he should go back to his regular mortal life. With his girlfriend and having to protect the camp, was this really a good decision? But she and Chiron both told him that he needs some time to relax. He's been working overtime, training new recruits, building up the camp's defenses, and planning strategies. And, as things stood now, he was most likely going to be the child of prophecy, so he needed some time to relax before that. There was still almost a full year until the prophecy was to come true, until his 16th birthday. Time flew by as Percy went back to school and, in fact, had Rachel as one of his good friends in class. She seemed to like him a lot, but Percy realized what she was really gunning at. But he was faithful. He wasn't like one of those jerks like Heracles. He was supposed to be the exception, and actually a good demigod son of Zeus, so he kindly let her down. But lucky for him, they were still good friends after that. He continued training a lot, knowing that there would be a big battle before his 16th birthday. And of course, being the de facto leader of camp, he was still in contact a lot. Finally, Charles Beckendorf came, on Pegasus. It was decided that now was the time. Him and Percy were gonna go blow up the Princess Andromeda. Percy said goodbye to Rachel, knowing that likely it would be some time before they next saw each other, and then went off to join Beckendorf. They rode the Pegasus a while until they were a bit off the shore and finally saw the Princess Andromeda. Beckendorf had prepared a lot of explosives, but they would have to drop them inside the ship to truly do the damage they wanted, and so they would have to go down. Sadly though, shortly after they went down on the ship, they were discovered, specifically Beckendorf, though he gave the signal that he was still able to plant the explosives. In front of him, Percy saw a tall, blonde swordsman, but this wasn't Luke. Whatever or whoever this was more evil titan than demigod man. His voice was raspy and his eyes seemed to be even more golden than last time, almost like someone put in a light bulb where his eyes should be. It was honestly weird, but Percy had to convince himself not to think about it too much. There are more important things to think about, and so when Beckendorf gave the signal, Percy was supposed to blow everything up. He had a remote too, but it was taken away by the monsters. Though of course, Percy was there to back him up, and he was chosen for a specific reason. He was the son of Zeus, and famous for having electrical powers. If he wanted an engine to blow up, he could do just that. And so, when Beckendorf gave the signal, he dove overboard, and Percy charged up his power and shot it right underneath him where the engine was. Not just the engine, but also all the explosives that Beckendorf laid all started to explode. Percy tried to jump off board as well, but it was too late. Before he could, he was blasted away by a huge shockwave hundreds of meters away from the ship, and when he landed, he was unconscious. When he regained consciousness, he was somehow breathing underwater. An attendant came by his room, and he was informed that he was in the city of Atlantis. He was told that he was saved by Poseidon personally, as a show of gratitude. Percy, hoping that this wasn't the favor Poseidon promised him, as he would definitely need it in the future battle to come, he said thank you and was able to swim up with someone helping him with magic that allowed him to breathe underwater and withstand all the pressure. Their mission was somewhat successful. They did blow up the boat, but it was depressing. Beckendorf was nowhere to be seen, and not even the Atlanteans saw him. He definitely died in that blast. Percy thought about going back to camp immediately to tell everyone what happened, and that likely Luke's forces would now strike. He was gonna iris message Nico D'Angelo. Last year, after the Battle of the Labyrinth, Nico promised him a power. He'd learned about it from all the ghosts he talked to, including a certain Achilles. This power was the legendary curse of Achilles. Percy didn't want to, as 1, he wasn't welcome in the underworld, and 2, this sounded like a stupid idea. But seeing one of his comrades die already before the true war had begun, he decided that he couldn't be so selfish. He would need to sacrifice something himself to fight for his friends. And so, Nico brought him to the river Styx. Warned once again by Achilles' ghost, he swam in the river Styx. He dove headfirst, with the only part not being exposed to the water was a small in his back. After what seemed like a minute to him, Nico fished him out and brought him to the shores of the Styx. Meanwhile, Percy, in his half-awake, half-sleeping trance, could only think of Annabeth. When he woke up, he was greeted by an army of the undead, sent by Hades to retrieve the son of Zeus, who was engaging in his territory. He was to be put in a cell as a bargaining chip for Hades, though they chose slightly the wrong time, as now Percy was awake, with Achilles' power. Not even needing to charge up his true demigod powers, he charged in for a fight. Initially, with only his bare fist, he was able to grab weapons from his enemies and use that to defeat the entire army in mere minutes. After he was done, he told Nico to let's go. Even Achilles' ghost was impressed, as a lot of these were soldiers who fought in the Trojan War. Very powerful ones. And Percy, not playing around anymore, took Nico and they went off to camp. The mood in camp quickly soured when they realized that Beckendorf was no more. Percy brought everyone up to speed, and specifically told Annabeth about a secret. He told him that he bathed in the river Styx. She was shocked at first, though later seemed to understand. She knew how caring Percy was, and seeing his teammate die was likely the triggering point. She didn't want any more allies to die. Sure, because they were her friends, but also because she didn't know what lengths Percy would go to. Would he fight against the gods or Hades himself to fight for their release from the underworld? She didn't know. Finally though, with enough preparation, Percy was finally told the full prophecy by the Oracle of Delphi. They were now mere days away from his 16th birthday, and so this was more than time. With recurring dreams of the gods fighting Typhon, realizing that New York, and therefore the Empire State Building, which housed Olympus, was vulnerable, Percy decided that the campers would need to defend Olympus itself. If the god's symbol of power were to be destroyed, most of their power would vanish, and then there would truly be no chance of defeating the Titans. Most demigods of camp went to New York to defend Olympus, though some stayed just to defend the camp if anything happened. And they called as many allies as they could, including the Hunters of Artemis, the Party Ponies, which were Charon's family, Tyson and his Cyclopes friend, and in this version they also have the help of the Ares cabin. In the books they didn't because there were disputes about the spoils of a quest, but here, Percy, when he found out that there was still an issue after Beckendorf's death, he decided to remind everyone where their real priorities should be, and he thought the best way of doing that was to intimidate them. He summoned all the power he could. A freak storm appeared not just over Camp Half-Blood, but over the entire state. The lakes are freezing over, and trees were ripped from the ground with the intense winds. Percy's powers by this point were to the point of a minor god. That, and Annabeth's strategic mind, were able to convince everyone that they really shouldn't care that much about this stupid chariot, but rather about the entire world ending by the hand of Titans. They have a lot of forces at their disposal, though when they're setting up a perimeter around the Empire State Building, they realize that something is still missing. Luke's forces could easily cross the rivers. It's then that Percy remembers what he really wants. Poseidon, now almost 2 years ago, offered his help, and this is exactly where he would need it. He prayed to Poseidon to help him fix the water issue, as he thought, well, that was probably what Poseidon was best for anyways. When he was done praying, the rivers in humanoid form came to shore and told Percy that they wouldn't let any monster pass them. He didn't know exactly why the rivers were suddenly on his side, but he thanked Poseidon and went off to prepare for the horde of monsters that was sure to come. A few hours later, it was time, as a huge horde of monsters appeared, most notably including the Minotaur. Percy was ready for payback, and so, before the monsters even charged them, Percy was first. He jumped across the bridge they were standing on, and using his sword, struck the Minotaur and slashed off its head, immediately dissolving it. He then continued fighting, for hours, and hours, and hours. Some demigods were firing arrows, as were the hunters, but most hadn't even started for fighting. Percy really was a one-man army. He was the storm incarnate, slashing in every direction, throwing monsters over the sea where the rivers would take care of them. But finally, a bigger foe appeared, Hyperion, another Titan. He engaged in a one-on-one fight with Percy. Initially, he was being pushed back, but Percy, using all the power he had, and a couple lightning strikes with Zeus's help as well, was able to push him back. Where enough support from the sides were able to distract Hyperion enough for Percy to strike him through his heart. The demigods cheered and the monsters retreated, their two strongest warriors, including a Titan, having been defeated. The demigods rested, most notably Percy himself, who had been fighting for hours on end, and the next morning a delegation came from the opposing side. They were willing to sue for peace, but, well, rather they wanted peace from the demigod side. They were willing to accept them to join their course, but of course, the gods would still need to fall. What was kind of weird though was that the one giving them this message was Prometheus, Titan of foresight. He was usually never wrong about these kind of things, hence why he fought for the gods in the first Titan War. But of course, Percy wasn't buying it, and he told them, kindly, to go away. Later, he would engage in more and more battle, though slowly other demigods were also having to pick up the slack. Not because Percy was weak or anything, but because he couldn't be the only one defeating the entire Titan army. Though Percy wasn't giving much time to rest. Soon later, Kronos appeared in the body of Luke. He reinvigorated the Titan army and sent a chill over all demigods' spines. Percy once again squared up to fight one-on-one against the Titan Lord. They started fighting, and Percy was a force to be reckoned with, though of course this was Kronos controlling the body of Luke, two incredible powerful people on their own. Percy was kind of holding his own, though he realized that Annabeth was fighting near him. As Percy was being charged from behind by none other than Ethan Nakamura, Annabeth went in to save him. Though instead of using a blade, she used her own body to protect him. As Percy heard a whelp, he turned around to see Annabeth on the floor, blood gushing out. And he couldn't think anymore. Everything started going blurry. Electricity started spewing in every direction, and lightning strikes were happening every 2 meters, every second. It looked like the apocalypse had truly come, as Percy was losing control and all sense of self. Percy charged at his opponents. First Ethan, who he disarmed, knocked on the head, and then threw 20 meters, and then going back to Kronos and other monsters. This time, Kronos was even on the back foot. This Percy Jackson was truly something else. And then Kronos decided to flee. Or rather, a tactical retreat, as he would call it. Percy, seeing his enemies flee, slowly started regaining regular consciousness, and he immediately brought Annabeth to the hotel where they were staying at, or, well, I guess their headquarters now, and dragged multiple Apollo kids to help her, bring her ambrosia and whatever else they needed. Annabeth was stabilized as Percy now immediately fell unconscious from all the stress and battling. The next time he would wake up, it was going to be the final round. Percy, now more willing to fight and give everything he had than ever, once again faced the Titan army, this time with less demigods at his side than before. When things were starting to look bad again, Nico arrived, this time with Hades and Persephone and Demeter at his side. 3 gods that previously weren't really fighting against the Titans, but Nico was able to convince them. This more than enough allowed them to concentrate on the big guy, Kronos. Whilst everyone was busy fighting for their lives, well, not the gods, but everyone else, Percy decided it was going to be him that would take on Kronos and Luke. Friend to friend and grandson to grandfather, Percy challenged Kronos to a one-on-one fight to the death. By this point, Percy also realized that Luke also had the curse of Achilles and was pretty much indestructible. Though with all of their fighting before, he realized that he was especially cautious about his arms, or rather his shoulders. So he continued trying to slash at them, but no luck, it kept bouncing off. But then he realized that he was incredibly stiff whilst fighting, not the style Luke usually went for. He never really raised his arms much during fighting, so that must be it. His weak point must be below his arms. Perhaps his armpit. Quite a clever idea, but one that now Percy realized how to defeat. Percy used his superior speed to outwit Kronos in the fight, and finally was able to defeat Kronos by shoving a sword through one armpit and out the other. It was quite brutal, but it worked. Luke's body slumped to the ground, and Percy Jackson stood victorious over the Titan Kronos. All of the monsters fighting in the Titan army were instantly weakened heavily, as they had previously been greatly strengthened by the Titan Lord. Tending to everyone's wounds, Percy was now truly the hero who saved Olympus. He was even thanked by Hades, who had previously tried to kill him, or at least kidnap him. And lastly, he was brought before the Council of the Gods, who returned to Olympus once the fighting with Typhon was also done. He now once more sat below a volcano.
Perseus Jackson, approach, my son. You have helped greatly in defeating the Titan Kronos and his army. I am willing to bestow upon you the greatest honor of all. You can become a god, an immortal Olympian. All the demigods in the hall cheered, and he looked back at Annabeth, and he actually got kind of angry. What? I don't want your stupid immortality or to be a god, Percy responded. Excuse me, Zeus said. I want you to do actually what's right. Free all the innocents hurt by this war, including Calypso and the likes. Honor the minor gods properly so that their children won't start another war. Be better rulers, so that there isn't always a horde of demigods willing to overthrow you at the earliest sign of power. You should do better with thousands of years of experience, yet you're a terrible leader. Zeus, my father, you should do better. That's my only wish. And with that short speech, Percy turned round, took Annabeth's hand, and left Olympus, hopefully for the last time. Looking back, it maybe was a bit dangerous to insult Zeus's rule in front of all the other gods, but he was happy with it. He said his piece, and fulfilled his promise to Calypso. Later, when he was by the lake, he also thanked Poseidon for his help. And finally, he kissed Annabeth, knowing that this was all finally over. Now hailed as camp leader, hero, and the greatest demigod of the generation, Percy Jackson was finally able to take a vacation and enjoy his time at the summer camp like a regular kid. And with that, the story is done. I really hope you guys enjoyed. This was quite a long one. And if there are any other stories you want me to do, comment them down below, and I'll see you in the next one.